I stood there, watching a bulldozer idle on the grave of my lake cabin. The HOA president smirked and called it a community upgrade. She had just erased the last place I ever saw my wife alive. But while they celebrated, they were making a fatal mistake. They had no idea I was about to find a single, forgotten document that wouldn't just give me my land back, it would give me all of theirs. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below because this is about to get biblical. And if you believe no homeowner should be powerless against a bully with a clipboard, hit subscribe so you don't miss the moment this entire HOA finds out who really owns them. The old Ford's tires crunched over the gravel. The same sound they'd made 1,000 times before. But this time, something was wrong. The air was still, too. I killed the engine and listened. No birds, no rustle of squirrels in the oak trees, just the low, angry hum of a diesel engine where it had no business being. I got out of the truck and the smell hit me first. Not pine and damp earth, but hot metal and exhaust. I walked past the line of young pines I'd planted with my daughter, and my heart seized up in my chest. Where my cabin should have been, there was a bulldozer. A big yellow machine sat on a fresh wound of red clay, its steel claw resting near a pile of splintered 2x4s and shattered glass that used to be my front window. My porch, the one I built with my own 2 hands, was just gone. A young guy in a reflective vest and a hard hat was pacing back and forth, barking into a walkie-talkie like he was storming a beach. He didn't see me at first. My brain refused to process it. This wasn't a building. This was the porch where my wife Sarah watched her last sunset. The only place my daughter slept peacefully after the accident. It was sacred ground. And now it was a pile of splintered memories. "Hey, you," the guy in the vest shouted, finally noticing me. He strutted over, all puffed up importance. "This is an active work site, sir. You can't be here." He looked barely old enough to rent a car, but he had the smug look of someone who'd just been handed a little bit of power and intended to use all of it. "Where's my cabin?" I asked. My voice came out flat and low, like a stone dropping into a deep well. He consulted a clipboard. "Of course, there's always a clipboard. You must be Mr. Leland. The unapproved structure at this location has been removed per HOA Directive 11B. This area is a designated floodplain, and the new community center will better serve everyone." He said it like he was reading a weather report. Zero emotion. "I never got a notice," I said, my fists clenching at my sides. "I never agreed to anything. I don't belong to your HOA. He just shrugged. "Can't help you there, sir. All I know is this is now HOA-managed property. You'll need to stay behind the new perimeter markers." He pointed to a series of flimsy orange stakes hammered into the ground, cutting right through where my vegetable garden used to be. The grief was a weight trying to crush me. But then, a colder feeling surfaced. The same focus I knew from my days in the Corps. Rage is a flashbang. Strategy wins wars. I kept it locked down. The first person to lose their temper loses the fight. Just then, a golf cart zipped up the path and a woman stepped out. She wore expensive sunglasses, a crisp polo shirt with the HOA logo, and a smile that was all teeth. This had to be Mara Brigsby, the HOA president. I'd heard stories from the few neighbors I knew. "Mr. Leland," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. We sent multiple notices." It was a bald-faced lie, and we both knew it. "I got nothing," I said, looking from her to the wreckage. "You had no right." She took off her sunglasses and tapped them against her clipboard. "Actually, we have every right. Your structure was a safety risk, an unpermitted build within a reclaimed access easement. The new community pavilion has already been fully permitted by the county." She smiled, that weaponized smile again. "It's all for the good of the community, you understand? Progress." My protests hit a brick wall. She just talked around every point I made, countering with some regulation number or a smug little head tilt like she was explaining something to a child. I was just a ghost on my own land. I left them there planning their new kingdom on the ashes of my old one. Maybe it was a mistake, a paperwork error. It had to be. I drove straight to the county records office, the little bell over the door jingling with false cheer. I sat on a hard plastic chair and waited for a clerk with a tired face to look up my deed. He typed for what felt like an eternity, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. "Here you are, Jack Leland," he mumbled, not looking at me. "Plot 7B. "That's it," I said, a flicker of hope starting to burn. "See, I own it. The HOA has no claim." He turned the monitor toward me and the flicker died. "Not exactly," he said, pointing a crooked finger at the screen. "You're listed as a non-resident plot holder. According to this amendment filed 6 months ago, the developer's original access easement was acquired by the Homeowners Association. They used a public access clause to reclassify the adjacent undeveloped plots, yours included. It was nonsense. Legal garbage designed to confuse and intimidate. This land has been in my family for 80 years. We owned it long before any developer broke ground on that subdivision." The clerk just shrugged. "All I can tell you is what the computer says. The paperwork's in order. Your appeal is rejected." I walked out into the blinding afternoon sun, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. The hope was gone, replaced by a cold, heavy certainty. This wasn't a mistake. It was an execution. I drove back to the lake, parking the truck a ways off and walking to the edge of the water. They were gone for the day. All that was left was the silence and the scar on the earth. In the middle of the churned-up dirt, a crew had already drilled the first holes and set the steel posts for their new building. They were moving fast. As I stood there watching the last of the sunlight gleam off that raw steel, the grief came back in a tidal wave. I saw Sarah's face, laughing on the porch swing. I saw my daughter learning to fish on the dock. They had taken all of it. They bulldozed my memories and were planning a potluck on top of them. The sadness was so thick I could barely breathe. But then something else surfaced. Something harder and colder. It started in my gut and spread through my veins. A slow-burning rage that pushed the grief aside. This wasn't incompetence. This wasn't a clerical error. This was theft. And the woman with the clipboard and the fake smile had underestimated her opponent. She thought she was dealing with a sad old man. She had no idea she just declared war on a Marine. The grief was a weight trying to crush me. But then, a colder feeling surfaced. The same focus I knew from my days in the Corps. Rage is a flashbang. Strategy wins wars. My workshop was no longer a place for building. It was my command post. And I started digging. I had my grandfather's old tin strongbox, the one that held every deed, every survey, every tax record for our family's land going back to the 1940s. The papers were brittle and smelled like dust and time. I spread the old plat maps across my workbench, their lines faded but precise. With a magnifying glass, I traced the boundaries my grandfather had walked, the same ones my father had taught me. There it was, clear as day on a survey from 1958. Lot 7B. A perfect rectangle hugging the shoreline, separate and distinct from the huge tract of farmland behind it that a developer eventually bought up in the late 90s. I kept digging, sorting through a mountain of paper until I found the original developer agreement. The language was thick with legalese, but the intent was simple. The developer had wanted lake access for their new subdivision, so they'd signed a leaseback clause. It meant they could build their roads and run their utilities around my family's plot. But they never, ever acquired the title to it. It was like renting a hallway in someone else's house. You can use it to get to your room, but you don't own the floorboards. I finally found a crack in their armor. A modern survey map from 5 years ago stapled to a zoning application. Cross-referencing it with my grandfather's original survey, I found an error. Their reclaimed land overlapped my property line by 0.3 acres. It wasn't much, but it was a fact. It was a starting point. I drafted a simple, professional email to the HOA's general inbox. I attached scans of both surveys, highlighted the discrepancy, and stated clearly that any construction on that overlapping section constituted trespassing. I didn't make threats. I just presented the evidence. I thought, naively, that a fact was a fact. Mara's reply came less than an hour later. It wasn't an inquiry or a request for clarification. It was a formal cease and desist letter from the HA's lawyer accusing me of harassment and intimidation of board members. Attached was a fine for $1,000. The next morning, another envelope arrived. A bill for $500 for abandoned structure cleanup. It was dated the day they bulldozed the cabin. They were charging me for the mess they made. A new one arrived every day after that, like clockwork. The fines were their way of bleeding me out, of making it too expensive to fight. The pressure wasn't just on paper. The few neighbors who used to give me a friendly wave now stared at their shoes when I drove by. One of them, a decent guy named Ed Mulallery, who used to be on the board, caught my eye one morning at the post office. He looked away fast, but not before I saw the apology in his eyes. Later that day, another neighbor, one I didn't know, stopped me as I was leaving. "You should know," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "Mara's telling everyone you were just squatting on that land, that you're trying to extort the community. They weren't just taking my land. They were taking my name." That night, my daughter called. Her voice was thin with worry. "Dad, I heard what's going on. Please just let it go. We can't afford a legal fight with an entire neighborhood. They're bigger than you. It's just a cabin. We still have the memories." I looked at the picture of her and Sarah on my desk, both of them smiling on the cabin porch. Her words were meant to comfort, but they felt like a surrender. And for a moment, I almost agreed with her. I drove out to the lake one last time. I didn't go to the flattened earth where the cabin used to be. I parked down the shore and walked to a small, quiet overlook. I sat on a folding chair from the back of my truck and watched the construction crew across the water. They were pouring concrete now. It looked so permanent. I felt a kind of tired I hadn't felt since coming home from the service. A bone-deep exhaustion that came from feeling utterly powerless. For the first time, I felt beaten. I sat there until the sun went down, then drove home in the dark. Back in the workshop, the strongbox was still open on my bench. I was ready to surrender, to pack the strongbox away for good. But as I lifted it, the bottom felt wrong. A slight give. A false liner, warped with age, hit a single, crisp manila envelope. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The last piece of my family's history. Or so I thought. Inside was a dense, multi-page developer's agreement from 2 years ago. It detailed the sale of the original development corporation to a new investment group. Standard stuff. But then I got to the addendums. Schedule C, transfer of assets. My eyes scanned the list of subsidiary holdings and contractual obligations being passed on. And then I saw a name that made the air go out of my lungs. Lakeside Holdings, LLC. It was my old company. The limited liability corporation I'd set up for my custom home building business and had forgotten about. Why was it in here? My finger trembled as I traced the line across the page. It was a lease management transfer. I kept reading, my heart starting to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The document stated that the original master land lease agreement for the entire subdivision, the ground under every house, every road, every manicured lawn, was being transferred to my LLC. The developer had cashed out, and instead of letting the lease expire, they'd offloaded it for pennies on the dollar to a dormant local company. My company. The HOA had never updated their records. For 2 years, they'd been defaulting on a contract they didn't even know existed. They thought they'd bulldozed a squatter shack. They had no idea they'd just picked a fight with their landlord. That night, I didn't sleep. The rage and grief were gone, replaced by a cold, clear calm. It was the same feeling I used to get before a mission. The objective was defined, the enemy identified, and all that was left was the quiet, meticulous work of execution. The next morning, I didn't fire off an angry email or make a threatening phone call. Instead, I drove to the city and found the office of an old friend, Dina Morales. Dina was a land use attorney and one of the smartest, toughest people I'd ever met. She'd cut her teeth fighting big developers on behalf of small farmers, and she had a special kind of distaste for bureaucratic bullies. I laid the papers out on her mahogany conference table. My grandfather's deed, the developer's original leaseback agreement, and the transfer of assets document. She read them in silence, her sharp eyes missing nothing. When she finished, she took off her glasses, leaned back in her chair, and let out a low whistle. "Well, Jack," she said, a slow grin spreading across her face. "You didn't come here for a cease and desist. You came here to drop a bomb." She was right. Over the next week, we got to work. First, we officially reactivated Lakeside Holdings LLC with the state, paying the back fees and bringing it into good standing. Next, Dina filed a quiet title action with the county court, a legal maneuver to formally establish my LLC's ownership and clear any competing claims. It was all done electronically, silently. No big announcements. The goal wasn't to scare them. It was to let them walk deeper into the trap they'd set for themselves. While the legal gears turned in the background, I started changing my own tactics. I began attending the weekly HOA meetings. They were held in the temporary trailers set up next to the construction site of their new community center, the one they were building on my land. I didn't speak. I didn't protest. I just sat in the back row, a thermos of black coffee in my hand, and watched. I listened as Mara Brigsby talked down to residents about the approved shades of beige for mailbox posts and the maximum allowable height for garden gnomes. I took notes as she proudly reported the progress on the community center, paid for by a special assessment fee she levied on every homeowner. My presence unnerved her. She'd falter in the middle of a sentence, her eyes darting to the back of the room. But I'd just give a polite, unreadable nod. My silence was louder than any argument I could have made. It made her escalate. The daily fines for the cleanup of my cabin doubled. Then came a new fine. $14,000 for failure to maintain property, with interest accruing daily. Mara posted my name and photo on the community bulletin board under a bold red headline. Trespasser alert. The notice warned residents that I was a disgruntled former plot holder attempting to disrupt community harmony. They put up temporary chain-link fencing to reroute the access road to my family's old fishing spot, effectively cutting me off completely. One afternoon, I came to the lake to find their pet security chief, a wannabe cop named Rick Tanner, blocking the path. He puffed out his chest and put a hand on the ridiculous tactical vest he wore. Private property, buddy, he grunted. You're not welcome here anymore. I just looked at him, then at the fence, and drove away without a word. Once Dina got confirmation that the quiet title had been recorded without objection, we made our first move. We didn't go after them for the bulldozed cabin. Not yet. We went for the foundation. Dina drafted a letter on her firm's letterhead and sent it via certified mail to the HA's registered agent. The letter was simple. It outlined that the HOA had been in continuous default of its master land lease agreement for the past 18 months by failing to remit payment to the new leaseholder of record, Lakeside Holdings LLC. It included a copy of the recorded title. We gave them an option. Pay the full back rent plus penalties, a sum well into 6 figures, or face eviction. We were giving them a chance to admit their mistake and make it right. I didn't expect them to take it. Prideful people never do. 2 days later, I was summoned to a meeting with the HOA's lawyer. He was a smarmy guy in an expensive suit who probably billed by the smirk. He had our letter on the table in front of him. Mr. Leland, he began, leaning back like he held all the cards. This is quite a creative piece of fiction you and your friend have cooked up. I said nothing. I just sat and let him talk. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, he continued with a condescending chuckle, that this oversight is somehow legitimate, that this ludicrous claim of yours is technically true. So what? The board will simply vote to reclassify the land use under a community ordinance. They'll condemn the lease, pay you pennies on the dollar, and be done with it. You've picked a fight you can't possibly win. He pushed the letter across the table back at me. Take my advice. Drop this fantasy. Pay your outstanding fines, and maybe the board will be lenient. I stood up, tucked the letter back in my jacket, and walked out of his office without saying a word. I made it to my truck before the calm finally broke. I sat in the driver's seat and slammed my fist against the steering wheel again and again until my knuckles were raw and bleeding. He thought it was a joke. They all did. They thought the rules were only for the little guys. That night, the plan changed. There would be no more offers, no more negotiations. They didn't want a landlord. They wanted a war. And I was going to give them one. The HOA lawyer's laugh echoed in my head all night. He thought I was playing checkers, but I was playing chess. He saw the lease as a nuisance, a pothole they could easily pave over. He didn't understand the ground beneath his feet was crumbling. The next morning, I called Dina. Forget the back rent, I said. They had their chance. It's time to pull the pin. She knew exactly what I meant. Dina drew up the official notice of lease cancellation. The original agreement my grandfather signed had an ironclad clause, one the developer's high-priced lawyers probably thought would never be used. It stated that in the event of a material default, like, say, not paying the leaseholder for 18 straight months, the lease could be terminated with 60 days' notice. Not renegotiated, not reclassified. Terminated. It was the nuclear option, and we were about to press the button. This wasn't a request for payment anymore. It was an eviction notice for the entire homeowners association. A process server, a big stoic guy who looked like he could walk through walls, delivered a copy to Mara Brigsby at her home, to the HOA lawyer at his fancy office, and another was filed directly with the county clerk. The fuse was lit. All hell broke loose. The next day, my phone started ringing off the hook. It was a reporter from the local paper, then a blogger who covered county politics. Mara had gone on the offensive, but she was sloppy and desperate. She gave an interview accusing me of running a sophisticated fraud, of being a corporate raider trying to steal people's homes. She sent out a panicked mass email to every resident, painting me as a villainous scammer trying to extort the community for millions. She was trying to frame it as David versus Goliath, with her and the HOA as the poor, innocent victims. She just had one problem. She'd picked the wrong David. I knew that in a fight like this, the first person to control the story wins. Mara was loud, but I was going to be clear. I didn't give an interview. I didn't write a rebuttal. I went into my workshop, set my phone up on a tripod, and recorded a video. I wore my normal work shirt, not a suit. The background wasn't an office. It was my workbench, with my tools hanging neatly on the wall behind me. I just sat on a stool and looked straight into the camera. "My name is Jack Leland," I began, my voice steady and calm. "Some of you know me. Most of you probably only know the name Mara Brigsby has been putting on flyers. She told you I'm here to take your homes. That's a lie. I'm here to take back mine." I kept it short, under 3 minutes. I didn't use any fancy legal words. I just told the story. I held up my grandfather's original hand-drawn map of the lakefront property. I showed the camera the developer's lease agreement with the key clause highlighted. I showed them the signed, notarized document transferring that lease to my company. And then I showed them the certified letters, returned and unopened, that Dina had sent months ago trying to resolve this quietly. I ended the video by looking right at the lens. They bulldozed my family's cabin without notice because they thought I was powerless. They thought the rules didn't apply to them. But the most important rule is this one. You don't take what isn't yours. This isn't about money. It's about accountability. The current HOA leadership broke the contract that allows this community to exist. My only offer is a simple one. You can stay, but they can't. I posted the video to a new public community page I created on social media and sent the link in a single, plain email to every resident address I could find in the public record. For the first few hours, there was silence. Then a few comments trickled in. Wait, is this for real? Then the trickle became a flood. People started sharing the documents. They tagged their neighbors. They asked questions. Simple questions Mara had never bothered to answer. Why wasn't this lease transfer disclosed? Where did the money for the new community center really come from? Suddenly, my phone rang. It was an unlisted number. "Is this Jack Leland?" a man's voice asked. It was Ed Mullally, the former board member who'd looked so guilty at the post office. "I just saw your video," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Everything you said, it's true. Mara buried that lease transfer 2 years ago. She said it was irrelevant paperwork. You're not wrong, Jack. You're not wrong at all." That was the moment the tide turned. Ed's comment on the video, a simple "he's telling the truth," was like a crack in the dam. Other residents started sharing their own stories of fines, of threats, of Mara's dismissive attitude. The narrative she'd tried so hard to control was slipping right through her fingers. The people she'd bullied into silence were finally finding their voice, and they were on my side. With the community now buzzing, it was time to move out of the shadows and into the light. I couldn't let the momentum die down in a string of online comments. We needed face-to-face. Using the community page, I called for a public meeting. I didn't frame it as a protest or a legal battle. I called it a community town hall to discuss the future of lakeside living. I booked the only large public space available on short notice, the half-finished recreation center they had built on the grave of my cabin. The irony was perfect. The night of the meeting, the place was packed. People were standing in the back, lining the walls. Every chair was filled. These weren't just the online complainers. These were homeowners, many of whom had lived here for decades, their faces etched with worry. They were afraid of losing their homes, and they were angry about being lied to. I saw Ed Mallory near the front, giving me a solid, steady nod. At precisely 7 o'clock, Mara Brigsby strode to the makeshift podium at the front, flanked by her smarmy lawyer and Rick Tanner, who was trying to look official standing by the door. Mara tapped the microphone, a sharp, piercing sound that made everyone wince. "Good evening," she began, her voice tight with forced cheerfulness. "I'm glad so many of you could come to our informational session tonight to clear up some of the malicious misinformation that has been circulating." She didn't look at me, but everyone else in the room did. Before she could launch into her scripted speech, I stood up from my seat in the front row. "With all due respect, Mara," I said, my voice calm but loud enough to carry through the cavernous room. "This isn't your meeting." I called it. And these people didn't come here to listen to misinformation. They came here for the truth. A murmur went through the crowd. Her lawyer stepped forward, but I ignored him and walked to the front, taking a position a few feet from the podium. I hadn't brought a briefcase or a stack of papers. I had one thing, a projector remote. I clicked it, and the wall behind Mara lit up with the image of my grandfather's hand-drawn survey map from 1958. "This is where it began," I said, my back to the screen, facing my neighbors. "This is my family's land, not the HOA's." I walked them through the whole story, just like I had in the video. But this time, it was different. This time, the evidence was 10 feet tall behind the person who had tried to hide it. I showed them the developer's lease, highlighting the terms of default. I showed them the recorded deed, transferring that lease to my company. I put the numbers on the screen. 18 months of non-payment. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in default. It was simple math. No jargon, no legalese. Just facts. "They didn't just take my cabin," I said, my voice dropping. "They put every single one of your homes at risk by breaking the very contract that gives this HOA the right to exist. They gambled with your security to build this monument to their own power." I gestured to the unfinished building around us. "They hold the clipboards, but I hold the lease to the ground under your feet." The room was dead silent for a moment, the weight of it all sinking in. Then a man in the third row stood up, his voice cracking with emotion. "Why didn't you come to us sooner? Why'd you let it get this far?" Before I could answer, a woman a few rows behind him shot to her feet. "Because they wouldn't have listened," she yelled, pointing at Mara. "They don't listen to any of us. My fine for the wrong mulch paid for that bulldozer, didn't it? The dam broke. They fined me for a sick dog," another yelled. "They put a lien on my mother's house." The room wasn't just a crowd anymore. It was a chorus of shared outrage, and Mara was finally hearing the music. Mara saw she was losing control. She grabbed the microphone, her knuckles white. "This is absurd," she shrieked, her voice screeching through the speakers. "This man is a liar with a personal grudge. He is forging documents to extort this community." The accusation hung in the air. This was the moment of truth. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just calmly raised my hand, and the room quieted a little. "A grudge?" I asked, looking her straight in the eye. "Is that what you call it?" I pulled 2 documents from my jacket pocket. "This is the cease and desist letter you sent me when I pointed out you were trespassing on my property." I held it up. "And this," I said, unfolding the second paper, "is the eviction notice. The one terminating your right to be here at all." I laid them on the table in front of her. The room flipped. The shouting wasn't just angry anymore. It was directed entirely at her. People were on their feet, pointing, demanding she resign. Her lawyer tried to intervene, but he was drowned out. Ed Mallory stood up and called for an emergency vote of no confidence in the board president, citing gross negligence. Someone else seconded the motion. It was chaos, but it was the beautiful, cleansing chaos of a coup. The board, seeing their own skins were on the line, caved. In a stunning on-the-spot vote, recorded on 100 cell phone cameras, Mara Brigsby was removed from her position, effective immediately. Then Ed made another motion. I moved to appoint Jack Leland as the interim board chair to oversee the renegotiation of our community's lease and restore order. The room roared its approval. A standing ovation washed over me, a wave of relief and vindication. Mara just stood there, her face a mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated fury. A queen dethroned in the very castle she'd built on stolen land. Losing power does something strange to people like Mara Brigsby. For them, power isn't just a tool. It's the air they breathe. Take it away, and they don't just get angry. They suffocate. And a suffocating animal will bite and scratch at anything. After her public humiliation, Mara didn't slink away in defeat. She spiraled. The victory at the town hall was just the end of the public battle. Now the private war began. The first sign of trouble came in the form of emails. Board members and a few key residents started receiving anonymous messages that appeared to be from my LLC's official address. They were filled with threatening language, demanding outrageous fee increases and making bizarre new rules. Things like mandatory daily flag salutes and restrictions on what color cars people could own. It was a clumsy attempt to paint me as the tyrant she had always been, but she wasn't very good at it. A quick look at the email headers showed they originated from a public library computer, not my secure server. It was amateur hour, but it was also a sign of her desperation. I had been a builder my whole life, and one thing you learn is to anticipate problems. After the meeting, I installed a few discrete high-definition security cameras on the edge of my property, focused on the access road and the old tool shed near where the cabin used to be. I had a feeling my work wasn't done. A few days after the fake emails started, a resident called me in a panic. The main storm drain near the new construction site was backing up, flooding several lawns. When a public works crew came out to inspect it, they found the pipe intentionally clogged with concrete mix and debris. Attached to the grate was a laminated sign with my LLC's logo on it, claiming the blockage was due to unauthorized water runoff. Mara had clearly paid a contractor a few $100 to commit a felony on her behalf, trying to turn the community against me by hitting them where it hurt, their own backyards. But what she didn't know was that one of my new cameras had a perfect, clear view of the drainage access point. The footage was grainy from the distance, but clear enough to see a beat-up contractor's van with no markings pull up in the dead of night. Two figures got out, spent 20 minutes at the storm drain, and then sped off. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was enough to prove the sabotage wasn't my doing. Her final overreach was born of pure ego. Mara couldn't accept that she'd been beaten by paperwork. In her mind, I had to have cheated. There had to be some other set of documents, some secret ledger that would expose my fraud. She convinced herself that I must be hiding the real papers in the one place she knew I still kept things, my old tool shed. The shed was the only structure on my property they hadn't touched. It was a sturdy little building where I kept my grandfather's tools and some personal effects. Late one Tuesday night, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from one of the new cameras. I pulled up the live feed, and there she was, plain as day, Mara Brigsby, dressed in black, jimmying the lock on my shed with a crowbar. She had Rick Tanner with her, acting as a lookout. He was pacing nervously, shining a flashlight into the trees while she worked on the door. It was almost comical. They were so consumed with their little conspiracy, they never even thought to look for the tiny dark lens watching them from a nearby pine tree. I didn't yell. I didn't drive down there myself. I did what any law-abiding citizen and interim HOA board chair would do. I called the sheriff's department. I explained calmly that there were trespassers on my property currently in the act of breaking and entering. I emailed the dispatcher a live link to the security camera feed. They had a squad car there in under 5 minutes. The footage of what happened next was priceless. 2 deputies rolled up without their lights on, catching Mara and Rick completely by surprise. Mara was halfway inside the shed, tossing old paint cans around. The deputies got them on the ground, lights in their faces, hands behind their backs. Mara, of course, tried to pull rank. "I am the president of the Homeowners Association," she shrieked, as if that was some kind of diplomatic immunity. "This is my property." The deputy's deadpan reply was beautiful. "Ma'am, according to the report, This is Mr. Leland's property, and you're under arrest for trespassing and destruction of property." The look on her face, that mix of shock, rage, and the final crushing realization that she had no power at all, was more satisfying than any victory in a meeting. With Mara facing criminal charges, the last piece of the puzzle fell into place. The final blow wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a simple civil claim filed by Dina on my behalf for full restitution for the value of the bulldozed cabin and all associated damages. The evidence was overwhelming. The HIA's own records showed they'd acted without proper notice. My ownership was now undisputed. Faced with a mountain of legal fees and the public fallout from their former president's arrest, the county's insurance carrier settled almost immediately. It was a substantial sum, enough to rebuild the cabin 10 times over, but I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. This was never just about me or my cabin. It was about what was right. The money wasn't for me. It was for us. Victory isn't a single moment. It's not a gavel strike or a public vote. It's the quiet, steady work that comes after. With Mara tangled in her own legal mess, her name becoming a cautionary tale whispered at neighborhood barbecues, the real rebuilding began. The first meeting of the new HOA board wasn't held in a sterile conference room, but in Ed Mullallery's garage, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and oil. We sat on overturned buckets and folding chairs, drinking coffee from mismatched mugs. There was no podium, no clipboard. We weren't a board of rulers. We were a committee of neighbors. Our first official act was to take the HA's Book of Bylaws, a 3-inch thick binder of petty rules and regulations Mara had spent years compiling, and toss it into a bonfire. We watched the pages curl and turn to ash, a symbol of the old way of doing things burning away. We replaced 100 pages of "you can't" with a single page of "we agree." We agreed to keep our property safe. We agreed to be respectful of our neighbors. We agreed to talk to each other before filing a complaint. That was it. The rest, we figured, was just common sense. Next, we had to decide what to do with the half-finished monument to Mara's ego sitting on my land. The steel skeleton of the community center was a constant reminder of the fight. Some wanted to tear it down, erase it completely, but that felt like a waste. At the next town hall, I made a different proposal. I told them about the settlement from the insurance company. I explained that every penny of it was being placed into a new community rebuild fund. And I suggested we use that fund to finish the building, not as an HOA clubhouse, but as a shared community workshop, a maker space, a place where someone could borrow a table saw, where kids could learn to weld, where neighbors could help each other fix a lawnmower instead of getting fined for it. It would be a place for building things up, not tearing people down. The building that was meant to divide us would now be the very thing that brought us together. The idea passed with a unanimous vote. The work on the maker space began almost immediately, with neighbors volunteering their time and skills. But first, I had my own project. I needed to rebuild the cabin. I cleared the rubble myself, salvaging what little wood was left, and laid a new foundation right where the old one had been. I started framing the walls alone, the familiar rhythm of the hammer a kind of therapy. By the second day, a truck pulled up. It was Ed Mullallery, tool belt on, carrying a framing square. "Figured you could use another set of hands," he said, not asking for permission, just picking up a chalk line. The day after that, 2 more neighbors showed up. One was a plumber, the other an electrician. A woman I'd never even spoken to before brought a cooler of sandwiches and water. Soon, it became a regular thing. Every weekend, a small crew of us would be out there raising walls, setting trusses, running wires. We weren't just rebuilding a structure. We were rebuilding the trust that Mara had shattered. We worked, we talked, we shared stories. We became a community again. When the cabin was finished, it looked almost exactly like the old one, but it felt different. It felt stronger, like its foundation went deeper than just concrete and stone. The last thing we built was the dock. As we were driving the final nail, Ed turned to me. "Need the name," he said, nodding toward the new dock. "Every good landing spot needs a name." Before I could even think, another neighbor spoke up. "Should call it Sarah's Landing." My breath caught in my throat. I just nodded, unable to speak. They had remembered. They understood what this place really meant. I'm sitting on the porch of the new cabin now, watching the sun come up over the lake. My daughter is down on the dock, casting a line into the still morning water. From here, I can see the lights on in the community workshop. Someone's already tinkering on a project. Mara's name has been wiped from every HOA record, every plaque, every document. It's like she was never here. I looked from my daughter on the dock to the lights in the community workshop. They didn't just give me my land back. They gave me my community. And that was a victory no piece of paper could ever guarantee. Justice isn't just about paperwork or winning in court. It's about people showing up for each other. And sometimes it's about being just stubborn enough to outlive the bullies and then building something better on the ground they tried to take from you. My daughter calls up from the dock, holding up a fish, her smile as bright as the morning. Sunday peace finally earned.